Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the flea-ridden, sweat-stained sheets of Tudor England and slipping into bed with some of the most revolting sleep habits you've never heard of. Picture this: you collapse onto a mattress stuffed not with feathers, but with scratchy straw crawling with insects. Your bedmates. Not just your spouse, but maybe a traveling merchant and his onion-scented boots. The room reeks faintly of smoke, human waste, and wet wool. And oh yeah, someone's probably peeing in the corner. It's cozy in a you probably won't survive this kind of way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle in for the night, or rather attempt to. The Tudor mattress, if you were lucky enough to have one, was often just a rough linen ticking bag stuffed with hay straw or reeds. No springy softness here, just the kind of lumpiness that gives your spine the overnight shape of a question mark. And that's if your bed hadn't already become home to a colony of unwelcome guests. Lice, fleas, mites, and bedbugs thrived in the warm crevices of rarely cleaned bedding, turning every night into a full-body itchathon. Even nobility wasn't immune. Wealthier homes might feature more luxurious materials like feather beds and woolen blankets, but since cleaning was difficult, infestations were practically guaranteed. One recorded Tudor remedy for lice involved smearing your scalp with a paste of mercury and hog's lard, which might have killed the lice, but also occasionally the person. And as for sheets, changing them wasn't a weekly event. It might happen every few months, if at all. Instead, people sometimes sprinkled herbs or crushed flowers over the bedding to mask odors, a medieval Febreze, if you will. Lavender and wormwood were favorites, though they probably just made the rot smell prettier. You might think this is where the grossness ends, but oh no. Imagine climbing into your itchy, infested bed, wearing clothes you'd been in all day because night clothes weren't always a thing. Maybe you've got a long linen shirt on, but many people just stripped to their undergarments, wool or linen, and hoped for the best. And undergarments is generous. Some folks didn't even wear those. Now add in the layer of grime. Personal hygiene was, let's say, seasonal at best. Baths were rare, and by rare we mean sometimes just 2 or 3 a year. Water was often cold, hard to haul, and suspect in cleanliness. So yeah, you're stewing in your own juices all night long. And let's not forget the sleep critters. Mice and rats frequently skittered across the floor or even into the beds. There are accounts of rodents nesting in mattresses, nibbling toes, or dragging off bits of bread tucked under pillows. Because yes, some people kept snacks in bed. Hygiene and sleep were on entirely different planets. For warmth, beds were often shared. Not just romantically, this was practical. Families squeezed into tight spaces, and body heat was essential. A mother might sleep with her children on either side, with a grandmother curled at their feet. In inns or traveler homes, you might be plopped beside a complete stranger who smelled of horse sweat and pickled herring. Personal space wasn't a thing, nor was modesty. Historians still argue whether this intimate communal sleep culture fostered deeper familial bonds or just spread more lice. Possibly both. You roll over itchy and irritable and wonder how anyone ever got decent rest. But here's the kicker, they kind of didn't. Nighttime in Tudor England was a rough deal physically, hygienically, and even spiritually. People feared demons, ghosts, and death in their sleep. but we'll get there later. For now, try not to scratch too hard. That lump under your shoulder, probably just a rock. Or a beetle. Probably. You jolt awake. It's pitch black. The fire's gone out. Your feet are freezing. And yet you're not alarmed. This is perfectly normal. In fact, this is what everyone does. Welcome to the eerie, perfectly Tudor concept of first sleep and second sleep. You see, back then, people didn't sleep in one long stretch like we do today. Instead, you'd drift off a few hours after sunset, say 9 or 10 p.m., and wake naturally sometime around midnight or a bit later. No one found this strange. It was just how bodies worked when artificial lighting didn't exist to keep you scrolling through TikTok till 2 a.m. So now here you are, wide awake in the dead of night. What do you do with yourself? Plenty. This quiet in-between time was sometimes called the watch or wake. You might pray. You might ponder your dreams. You might check the livestock. You might, if you're lucky, and it's not freezing, enjoy a bit of marital bonding. Tudor physicians even recommended this liminal period as the best time to conceive something about humors being properly balanced and the body warmed but not weary. Or maybe you just stare at the rafters swatting fleas, but not everyone stayed in bed. Many actually got up. This was a time to add logs to the fire, go outside to relieve yourself more on that later, or tend to chores best done before dawn. Some baked bread, some spun wool. Others just chatted by candlelight. You might find neighbors calling through open windows. A little midnight gossip wasn't out of place. There's even evidence of people visiting others during this time, walking in the cold, dark night with a lantern to drop in on friends or lovers. Forget you up texts. In Tudor times, they just knocked on your wooden door at 1:30 in the morning. One 16th century French physician, Jean de La Fontaine, wrote about this segmented sleep as if it were a healthy natural cycle. And indeed, when modern scientists deprived volunteers of artificial light, they naturally adopted the same rhythm: sleep, wake, sleep again. It wasn't weird. It was biology pre-electricity. Of course, this second wakeful stretch had its downsides. Your room was cold, the fire nearly out. There were no lamps, just tallow candles or rush lights that stank and smoked. The air inside was heavy with the day's smells, sweat, smoke, stew. You might light a tiny ember to make tea or gruel, but mostly you shivered in the dark, wrapped in coarse linen, muttering half prayers under your breath. And let's not forget the sleep demons. This was also prime time for nightmares, or what they called mare riding. People believed malevolent spirits or even witches sat on your chest and fed on your breath while you lay helpless. Sleep paralysis, of course, was the modern explanation, but back then it was terrifying. If you stirred during the watch, you might be doing it to recover from a ghostly assault. Historians still argue whether this two-part sleep was the norm for all social classes or more prominent in rural households. Some point to city dwellers' erratic work hours as a disruptor of this tidy cycle. Others suggest it was universal until gas lamps and clocks turned night into a single continuous stretch. Regardless, you'd eventually crawl back into that scratchy straw pit for your second sleep. This one would carry you until the cock crowed, assuming, of course, that your feet didn't freeze off, or the mice didn't chew your shoelaces again. And if you slept straight through without waking for a midnight prayer or snack, well, that might have been seen as odd. Or worse, lazy. So next time you wake up at 2 a.m., for no reason, maybe light a candle, hum a hymn, and remind yourself you're just living your inner Tudor truth. It's the middle of the night. You're groggy from first sleep, your feet are freezing, and nature is calling loudly. But there's no ensuite bathroom. There's not even a hallway. There is, however, a chamber pot. Somewhere. Hopefully nearby. And thus begins the delicate, sloshing, semi-public ballet of Tudor midnight toileting. You shuffle across the room in your long shirt, careful not to trip on the dog sleeping near the hearth, or step on that suspiciously damp floorboard. Ah, there it is, a ceramic or pewter pot tucked beneath the bed. You fumble with it in the dark, praying not to knock it over. Why? Because these pots weren't just used once. They might sit half full for days. And let's be honest, people weren't always careful. It wasn't unheard of for someone to miss, especially in the dark. Spillage happened. And if you were really unlucky, you might be the one who rolled out of bed and onto it. Now imagine this, you're staying at a friend's house or a roadside inn, and you need to relieve yourself. There's no chamber pot in the room. What do? Some simply squatted in the corner, especially if the floor was dirt. Others, particularly men, would open the window and let it fly. City streets were often peppered with the remnants of last night's digestive decisions. There's even a recorded case of a woman in London who was arrested for throwing her chamber pot contents out the window and onto a passing constable. To be fair, she probably wasn't aiming. So yes, chamber pots were common, but emptying them was another story. Many people, especially in lower-class homes, didn't do it every day. That pot might stew in the corner for a while, gathering a rich scent and attracting flies. In larger houses, this was a servant's job, often the lowliest one. Imagine being the chambermaid, whose entire morning began with a round of guess what that smell is. Oh, and here's a delightful twist: in some wealthier homes, chamber pots were decorative. They had painted interiors with witty phrases or caricatures. You could quite literally pee on your least favorite noble's face, then go back to bed with a smile. But the ballet isn't over yet, because you weren't alone. In that room, perhaps no larger than a modern closet, you might be surrounded by parents, siblings, children, or strangers. Using the chamber pot wasn't exactly a private affair. Modesty took a back seat to function. You'd either turn your back and hope for the best, or everyone politely pretended to be asleep. And don't think children got their own special arrangement. Toddlers often wet the bed or the floor, and no one blinked. Some families even designated certain spots in the house as informal pee corners, usually near a door or hearth. In one famous account from a Norfolk manor, guests had to carefully step over the customary corner during nighttime visits. Charming. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were standard across all classes, or whether the poorest Tudors simply relieved themselves in the open air. Archaeological digs suggest both occurred often in the same neighborhood, and when morning came, the chamber pot shuffle resumed. Maybe you carried the reeking vessel out to be emptied into a cesspit, or sometimes just tossed it into the street. There's a reason many Tudor towns stank to high heaven. You didn't need a map to find the latrine, you just followed your nose. So the next time you complain about dragging yourself to the bathroom at 3 a.m., imagine trying to aim into a shallow pot by candlelight, while 4 other people snore around you and a rat watches from the wainscoting. Sweet dreams. You wake up for your second sleep and roll over straight into someone else's elbow, or knee, or possibly their entire back. Because in Tudor England, your bed is not your private sanctuary. It's a shared, often chaotic pile of limbs, snoring body heat, and questionable smells. Welcome to the world of communal bed sharing, an experience that redefines the meaning of close quarters. You might be sleeping beside your spouse, or your children, or your cousin, or a traveling merchant you just met this afternoon. It was common for friends' extended family, and even total strangers to bunk up together, especially if you were on the road. Beds were expensive, firewood even more so, and bodies were heat sources, not just talkative bedmates. In inns, guests were often matched in shared beds regardless of social status. It wasn't rare for two men or two women who had never met before to sleep shoulder to shoulder under the same blanket, their only divider a thin line of determined awkwardness, and sometimes not even that. The practice had an actual name, bedfellows. It was normalized, expected, and even praised in some cases. In fact, sharing a bed with someone of importance could be a sign of trust or favor. Kings shared beds with courtiers not sexually, but as a political signal. Your proximity to the monarch, quite literally, was a symbol of your influence. Still, that didn't make it hygienic. Tudor people didn't just smell bad, they lived bad. Imagine climbing into bed beside someone who hadn't bathed in 2 months, whose breath smelled of pickled onions, and who was still digesting a dinner of eel pie. There's no mint, no deodorant, no pajamas, just unwashed linen and the unfiltered aroma of a long medieval day. And let's talk about movement. With multiple people jostling in one bed, sleep was a kind of synchronized chaos. If one person had to get up and use the chamber pot, remember that joyful ritual, everyone probably woke up. If someone had night terrors or started muttering in their sleep, you all heard it. And if someone brought bedbugs into the mix, congratulations, everyone now has bedbugs. It wasn't just families who shared beds either. Apprentices slept beside their masters, servants with each other. Wealthier households might have a truck bed, a sort of roll-out mattress for children or servants tucked under the main bed like a trundle. If you were lucky, you got the top bunk. If not, you got the floor. In one 16th century, will a man bequeathed his best feather bed and the 2 men who sleep upon it. The bed was property. The people apparently just accessories. Historians still argue whether this bed-sharing culture promoted strong bonds or was merely an unavoidable consequence of tight quarters and cold winters. Some believe it cultivated a culture of trust and intimacy. Others say it fostered illness tension and the occasional mysterious midnight elbow to the ribs. And yet no one really thought it was weird. Not then. It was practical, economic, necessary. Privacy as we know it didn't exist, not in homes, not in sleep, and certainly not under the covers. So there you are, wedged between your father-in-law and your neighbor's teenage son, all of you farting gently into the straw. One starts snoring, another coughs up something ominous, and someone, probably a child, murmurs a prayer into the darkness, and somehow you drift off again. You wake up to the unmistakable sound of something crunching beneath your shoulder. You reach under the thin linen sheet and pull out a mysterious, crispy lump, possibly a dead beetle, maybe just a clump of soot. Either way, it's your reminder that in Tudor England, your bed linens are filthier than a stable floor, and changing them is a luxury you're not likely to experience anytime soon. Let's start with the basics. Washing linens was a major ordeal. You couldn't just throw sheets in the wash. There was no wash. There were wooden tubs, boiling pots, harsh lye soap that could peel your skin off, and hours of laborious scrubbing. Water had to be hauled, firewood gathered, stains beaten with paddles. It wasn't a weekly chore. It was a full-day event. So instead of cleaning sheets, often most people just didn't. The linen sheets, if you had them collected, everything, sweat skin oil, soot from the fireplace, and whatever your bedmates brought with them, bodily or otherwise. Add the straw-filled mattress that hadn't been replaced since the last monarch, and you're sleeping on a fabric compost heap. And we're not just talking dirt. Beds were breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and mites, especially when the straw stuffing wasn't regularly changed. If you so much as missed a single cleaning season, and many did, you risked an infestation that turned bedtime into a full-body scratch-off ticket. Now, in case you think the wealthy had it better, yes, they technically did. Wealthier households owned multiple sets of sheets, employed laundry staff, and had fancier mattresses made of feathers or wool. But here's the catch: luxury doesn't mean clean, because feather beds, while soft, were almost impossible to clean. The down inside got damp, matted, and reeked. And their sheets, though embroidered and expensive, weren't changed any more frequently than the peasants' plain ones. Nobles just smelled fancier while marinating. To cope, people layered. You'd put a rough linen undersheet beneath you, a coarser one on top, and sometimes even a blanket of rugs made of worn, recycled fabric scraps. These weren't for comfort, they were for insulation. Tudor homes were drafty, often with unsealed windows and gaping gaps in the floorboards. You slept under a mountain of musty fabric, not because it was soft, but because you didn't want to freeze. And when something inevitably spilled, a mug of weak ale, a child's accident, someone's post-chamber pot misfire, what did people do? They flipped the sheets over, or sprinkled herbs to mask the smell, or just rolled to the other side and prayed for morning. There's a documented case from a manor household where the same mattress was used for 42 years. By the time someone decided to replace it, the stuffing had rotted. The linens were stiff with grime, and the bedbugs had developed a sort of tenancy agreement. Still, bed making was a morning ritual. You'd shake out the sheets, sending plumes of dust and fleas into the air, smooth them over, and maybe tuck in a few sprigs of lavender or sage. Some folks even ironed their sheets with hot stones wrapped in cloth, not for cleanliness, but to kill fleas and take the edge off the cold. Historians still argue whether laundry was more frequent in monasteries and noble houses, or equally neglected everywhere. Monks likely had the best hygiene systems, but even they often aired out bedding rather than washing it. The sun, they believed, could bleach away the sins and the smells. So tonight, as you burrow into your own freshly laundered lavender-scented sheets, take a moment to picture yourself rolling onto a damp patch, inhaling the sweet perfume of foot odor and chimney soot, and wondering if that tickle on your neck is a hair or a louse. Spoiler, it's not a hair. You stretch your legs beneath the blankets, grateful for even a sliver of warmth, and then suddenly you hit it. That corner. That wet corner. And no, it didn't rain indoors. Congratulations, you've discovered your home's dedicated pee zone. Because in Tudor England, the floor was fair game, and sometimes even preferred. You see, not every home had a chamber pot. Not everyone wanted one. They were clunky, smelly, and if you were a light sleeper, the sound of someone fumbling around in the dark, for it was enough to ruin your night. Instead, many families developed a simpler, though profoundly more disgusting solution. A designated spot on the floor where people relieved themselves during the night. And it wasn't always in a corner. In one noted 16th century household, the chosen spot was next to the fireplace since it was warm and easy to clean, theoretically. If cleaning means smearing ashes over it with a broom once a week. Urban homes were even worse. In the cramped back alleys of Tudor London, there was rarely space for private toilets. So upstairs, tenants might simply urinate in a bucket or directly on the floor and let the contents trickle between the loose floorboards into the open air below. And by open air, we mean the neighbor's living space. Needless to say, the stench in densely populated neighborhoods could knock out a mule. Some inns took pride in offering a proper chamber pot, usually a cracked ceramic bowl with a name etched onto the side. But travelers often found the nearest wall or support beam and let nature take its course. The smell soaked into the timber, the linens, and eventually your memories. But the floor wasn't just for urine. Oh no. Children's accidents, pet droppings, drunken misfires. Tudor floors soaked it all up. Straw was sometimes scattered across the floor to mask the worst of it. This was called rush covering, and while it did absorb liquids, it also trapped bacteria and bugs. It was like living on a compost pile wrapped in a rug. Still, the practice was so widespread that it barely raised eyebrows. If you were caught short in the middle of the night and the chamber pot was full, or across the room, past two snoring relatives and a snoring pig, you did what had to be done. Squat and go. Tomorrow someone would splash a bucket of water in that general direction and call it good. For those slightly more refined, there were close stools, essentially wooden boxes, with a hole and a chamber pot hidden inside. These were more common in wealthier homes, but even then, the pots weren't always emptied right away. There's a rather grim account of a Tudor noblewoman who died after slipping on the spilled contents of an overfilled stool. Slapstick, yes. Sanitary, never. Historians still argue whether rural households were cleaner due to access to outdoor space or filthier due to animals sleeping indoors. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Everyone had creative, horrible ways of managing the business of midnight urination. And if you think the smell was contained, think again. During the summer months, urine-soaked straw mixed with the stink of sweat cooking grease and open wounds created a kind of nose-punching perfume that made Tudor nights memorable. No wonder people lit bundles of herbs and stuck them in their windows, not for decoration, but to survive the smell. So tonight, when you pad across your polished hardwood floor to use a toilet that flushes, consider this had you been born 500 years earlier. Your nightly ritual would involve a guess, a squatting posture and a prayer that no one stepped there before you. It's cold tonight, and you're pulling your blanket up over your ears. But wait, don't forget your nightcap. Not the warm drink, though, that's coming too, but the actual hat. Because in Tudor England, nobody went to bed bareheaded. The chill seeped through the timber walls, the windows barely closed properly, and your only defense against a frozen scalp, a long, soft, often ridiculous-looking linen cap tied under your chin like a very sleepy baby. Nightcaps weren't just for warmth. They were considered part of proper bed attire. Men wore floppy, drooping ones that looked suspiciously like limp socks. Women often wrapped their hair in linen to protect it from getting tangled, matted, or if you were unlucky, infested. Head lice weren't just a childhood inconvenience. They were full-time residents. A good nightcap kept them from wandering too far, or at least made them easier to catch. And while your head was toasty, your stomach might be warming up too, thanks to the other kind of nightcap. Before bed, many Tudors drank something to help them sleep. It could be a mug of warm ale, a spiced wine known as Hippocras, or a weak beer, which, fun fact, even children drank, because water wasn't always safe. But sometimes these drinks were mixed with herbs, and that's where things got interesting. Want to sleep deeply? Pop some poppy seeds in your wine. Trouble staying asleep, a little valerian or lettuce juice might help. Want vivid dreams, maybe even visions of angels or demons? That's where things got really Tudor. Some people mixed in mandrake root henbane or even belladonna. The problem? All three are toxic. Belladonna alone can cause hallucinations, dry mouth confusion, and death if you go overboard. Still, they were widely used in small doses, especially by cunning folk and herbalists who promised better dreams, longer sleep, or even prophetic visions. A mug of this stuff could knock you out and possibly keep you out forever. And of course, if you were really desperate for rest, you might rub a homemade ointment on your temples, often made with lard lavender and crushed frogs or slugs. Did it work? No. Did it smell awful? Almost certainly. Nightwear wasn't uniform either. While wealthy people might have fine linen nightshirts, many Tudors simply slept in whatever they were already wearing, or nothing at all. Modesty was mostly a daytime affair. In colder months, you might wrap yourself in every layer you owned, nightcap included, until you looked like a shivering ghost burrito. And still, you'd wake up freezing. It didn't help that fires weren't always allowed to burn through the night. There were laws about house fires in urban areas, and most people banked the coals before bed, leaving the room to slowly lose its heat. Your nightcap, it was basically your personal furnace. And if you had servants, they probably slept near the hearth or in the hallway, with only their clothes for bedding. Some curled up with dogs which doubled as warmth and security. One Tudor writer joked that you could always spot a servant's bed by the snoring and the fleas. Historians still argue whether these herbal nightcaps were truly common or mostly the domain of folk healers and the wealthy. But numerous records suggest that nighttime potions, brews, and cap-wearing were familiar features of Tudor sleep culture. So tonight, as you sip your chamomile tea and adjust your thermostat, spare a thought for your Tudor twin sitting cross-legged by the fire, swishing mandrake-laced ale and tying a floppy linen sock to their head in hopes of a warm, nightmare-free night. Spoiler alert, they're still going to dream about devils. The candle flickers. The shadows stretch long and strange across the timbered ceiling. You roll over, adjusting your lumpy pillow stuffed with old rags, and then you smell it. Tallow. Burning fat. Your bedmate forgot to snuff the candle again. And suddenly, your entire home is one careless elbow away from becoming a roaring inferno. Welcome to the terrifying coziness of Tudor bedtime lighting. There were no light switches, no cozy LED night lamps. If you wanted light after sunset, you had three options: a tallow candle, a rushlight, or the fading glow of a hearth fire. And all three came with a high risk of accidentally burning your house and yourself down while trying to find your way to the chamber pot. Tallow candles were made of animal fat, and they stank, like really stank. Imagine sleeping next to a slow-burning bacon strip that spits smoke and soot while melting into a greasy puddle. That was the good option. Rushlights were worse strips of dried reed dipped in grease and stuck into a clip. They burned fast, unevenly, and were so cheap that even peasants could afford them at the cost of scorched fingers and ash-covered bedding. Leaving a candle burning while you slept was a real gamble. It was common for people to fall asleep mid-prayer, with a candle still flickering at their bedside. If the flame caught your blanket, your straw mattress, or your wooden bed frame, well, that was that. One wrong move and you'd be waking up in a panic, surrounded by smoke and flames. Or not waking up at all. And remember, houses were mostly timber, with straw roofs and dry rushes on the floor. Lighting a fire inside one was basically asking the universe for a little drama. In wealthier homes, you might have a candle watch, a servant who stayed up to monitor the fire and the lights. But most people weren't so lucky. They'd try to bank the hearth fire with ashes, hoping it would smolder without flaring up, or they'd stick a candle in a metal lantern and hope it didn't tip over when the dog brushed past it at midnight. Still, people couldn't not have light. Darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was terrifying. The line between the natural world and the supernatural blurred after sunset. Strange noises in the walls, flickers in the corner of your vision. A creak from the floorboards above was that just the wind or something older, and so people lit candles anyway, even when they knew the risk. Some hung them in protective holders. Some placed bowls of water nearby, believing the spirits hated reflection. Others just muttered a quick prayer and tucked in, hoping the flame didn't decide to do anything adventurous. There's a chilling record of a fire in 1580s York that began when a young boy fell asleep while his candle was still lit. The fire jumped to the curtains spread to the thatched roof, and by morning, 4 neighboring homes were gone. The official report listed neglectful lighting as the cause, an all-too-common phrase in Tudor fire logs. Historians still argue whether Tudor folk were truly careless with their candles or simply accepting of fire as an inevitable part of life. But one thing's clear, nightlight safety standards were non-existent. So now, as you click off your soft bedside lamp wrapped in your fire-retardant bedding with a working smoke detector overhead, imagine falling asleep next to an open flame in a wooden room on a hay-stuffed mattress while the wind howls outside. Sleep tight. Don't let the curtains catch fire. You jolt awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The dream was vivid, too vivid. A dark figure pressing on your chest, whispering in a voice older than language. You try to move, but your limbs feel like lead. Your frozen eyes, wide breath shallow. Congratulations. In Tudor England, you've just been visited by a demon. They had a name for this, the mare, a malevolent night spirit that sat on your chest and crushed your breath. The term nightmare comes straight from this belief. And during the Tudor period, people genuinely feared it. Because in a world without medical knowledge of sleep paralysis, vivid dreams weren't just unsettling. They were omens, warnings, or literal hauntings. And this wasn't fringe thinking. Even educated physicians wrote about nocturnal visitations caused by unclean humors, bad air, or demonic mischief. If you woke gasping in the night, it wasn't a bad dream. It was a sign that something had found you in your sleep, something that might come back. To protect yourself, you might tuck a clove of garlic beneath your pillow, or sleep with a sprig of rosemary near your head. Some people kept dried toad skins under the bed, believing the creature's essence could repel witches and evil spirits. Others tied protective charms or crosses to the bedposts, hand-carved from yew ash or rowan wood, each chosen for its magical properties. And let's not forget the midnight prayers. A typical Tudor might recite the Lord's Prayer or whisper psalms, but more than a few reached for extra spiritual insurance. A popular bedtime charm went something like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or bless the bed that I lie on. Sweet, yes, but with an undercurrent of fear. The spiritual world was never far away, and dreams weren't just scary, they were meaningful. Dream books, some handwritten and passed down like family heirlooms, interpreted every image. Dream of teeth falling out. A death in the family. Dream of running. A betrayal. Dream of fire sickness. People tracked their dreams like diary entries, mapping them against real-life events in search of patterns. Some even paid for interpretations. Dream readers, often women, charged coin to explain whether your dreams meant good harvests, lost love, or impending doom. The lines between sleep, religion, magic, and medicine were fuzzy. Very fuzzy. There's a particularly odd account from a Suffolk parish in 1597. A woman claimed she was being visited nightly by a black man with glowing eyes. She began waking up screaming, her skin bruised and her hair in knots. The local clergy held an exorcism. Meanwhile, skeptics suggested it was just her husband trying to sneak into the alehouse at night. Supernatural fears were so ingrained that even furniture design reflected them. Some beds had tester canopies, wooden roofs over the bed, not just for warmth, but to protect from spirits falling onto the sleeper. Others had carvings on the headboard, faces, vines, symbols, warding off unseen visitors in the night. And don't forget, these fears were justified in the Tudor imagination. With infant mortality high and sudden adult deaths, common people saw the night as dangerous. Illness struck without warning. Plagues moved silently. People who went to bed healthy sometimes never woke up. Naturally, that had to be more than just germs. It had to be demons or punishment. Historians still argue whether these night terrors were amplified by malnutrition, extreme cold, or lead poisoning from pewter mugs. But one thing's clear, Tudor folk didn't see sleep as safe. It was a vulnerable crossing into a world they didn't understand, and they feared what might follow them back out of it. So tonight, if you feel a little pressure on your chest, or glimpse a shadow in the corner that vanishes when you look twice, it's probably nothing. Probably, you blink awake, your breath fogging in the cold. Your nose is numb, your fingers stiff. The blanket's scratchy wool over straw mattress barely holds in the warmth. There's a layer of frost on the inside of the window. Welcome to Tudor winter nights, where freezing indoors wasn't a fluke, it was the norm. You think winter's bad now? Imagine sleeping in a house without insulation, no central heating, and only a thin fire that had long since sputtered out. Stone walls kept out the wind, but also locked in the cold, and most floors were bare earth or laid with straw. If you were lucky, you had rushes. If you were very lucky, they were clean. Tudor folk didn't just tough it out. They got weirdly creative. People wore nightcaps to bed, not just for fashion, but to keep their ears and heads from freezing. Entire families often slept in the same bed, partly for space, partly to share warmth. You'd spoon your siblings, your parents, your kids, and yes, sometimes even your goats or pigs, especially in poorer rural homes. If it breathed and generated heat, it made the guest list. Now it gets better or worse. Beds weren't always soft havens. Poorer families might sleep on wooden boards, straw pallets, or even bundles of heather tied with twine. These beds were placed close to the hearth, hoping to soak up residual warmth from the coals. But in winter, luck, and the drafts. Oh, the drafts. Windows were single glazed or just cloth-covered holes. Shutters rattled. Gaps between the walls let in whistling wind. Some people tried to hang thick woolen curtains around the bed, early versions of 4 posters, just to trap their body heat. Did it work? Sort of. But it also meant the bed became this tiny, smelly microclimate. Air got stale quickly. If you had 3 siblings and 1 flatulent uncle under the same blanket, you'd be praying for a draft by morning. For extra warmth, some households used bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals swept over the sheets before bedtime. Sounds lovely, right? Well, occasionally the pan cracked or someone spilled the coals, and then smoldering mattress. Fire risk again. Naturally. One Tudor lady, Lady Anne Clifford, recorded in her diary that her hands grew so cold one January night that the ink froze mid-sentence. She finished her entry with her hand wrapped in a wool sock curled beside her dog. Because yes, even aristocrats weren't immune, and sleeping in cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it shaped their biology. Many Tudor folks experienced what's now called segmented sleep. They'd sleep for a few hours, wake up around midnight, stoke the fire, maybe pray, write in a journal, or sneak off to a neighbor's bed. Don't ask, and then go back to sleep for a second shift. This midnight interlude was often blamed on the cold. You couldn't stay asleep because your feet were literally blocks of ice. Historians still argue whether this split sleep pattern was cultural or physiological, but the link to winter is hard to ignore. In summer months, diary entries show longer sleep stretches. In winter, everyone's up half the night pacing, blowing on their fingers, muttering at the fireplace. And because fireplaces often smoked or puffed soot, you'd sometimes wake up coughing with your face blackened from a night's worth of gentle asphyxiation. The wealthy had chimneys. The poor had to leave a hole in the roof and hope the wind didn't blow back. So tonight, as your duvet cocoons you and the thermostat hums gently, remember your Tudor counterpart, shivering under a musty blanket, breath fogging in front of their face, dreaming of spring or maybe just another pair of socks. Sleep warm. You stir in your straw-filled mattress as the faint clanging of a church bell echoes through the chilly dawn. But you're not waking up. You're trying to fall back asleep after the midnight mayhem. Tudor nighttime wasn't silent. It was alive and sometimes very rude. Because here's the thing, nights were not quiet in Tudor towns. Between drunkards stumbling home from the alehouse, cats yowling in the alley, or the occasional cart trundling by sleep was constantly interrupted. But inside the house, that's where things got personal. Let's start with nocturnal noises. People snored, loudly. Why? Because everyone was stuffed full of bread ale and meat-heavy dinners, lying flat on their backs on poor mattresses and sharing beds with 5 other people. A snoring match between your grandfather and your cousin wasn't just background noise, it was the Tudor version of surround sound. Add in digestive unrest. Tudor food hygiene wasn't stellar, and people often went to bed bloated, fermented, or worse. One bad turn of the stomach, and the whole room would groan. You squished on the outer edge of the bed, would try to ignore the ominous gurgling from your father's belly, or the sudden nasal whistle of someone with an infected tooth, or the hacking cough of a sibling with chronic bronchitis, which back then was basically everyone in winter. And then there were the sounds outside the body. Rats, mice, scuttling through the thatch above your head, chewing on the rushes near your feet, sometimes even crawling across the bed. It was common to wake up to find droppings in the corner. You might even slap a rat off your ankle and try to fall back asleep as if that were perfectly normal. Because it was. Now, some Tudors tried to combat the chaos with their version of white noise. In noble homes, servants might place bowls of water near the hearth to hiss gently as they evaporated. In others, lullabies were whispered oddly dark, often mentioning death or sleep as a forever rest. Comforting. And then there was the human alarm clock, the night watchman. His job wander through the streets and shout the hour, loudly, often adding tidbits like all's well or 1 o'clock and a clear sky. That's right, he yelled the time while you were trying to sleep. In theory, it was reassuring. In practice, it was a guy screaming at your window every hour. Now add in bodily needs. If someone had to use the chamber pot in the middle of the night, the sound of shifting bodies, whispered apologies, sloshing liquid, and the occasional loud oops could jolt the entire bed awake. And remember, the pot was in the room sometimes, right next to the bed. You tried to hold your breath and pretend you weren't hearing what you were hearing. And then, because sleep is rarely sacred, there was the midnight visitor. A neighbor, a servant, a relative banging at the door in the middle of the night. Fires broke out. Horses escaped. The midwife was needed. Or someone had just seen a witch and needed backup. Because naturally. Historians still debate just how common it was for people to roam during the night, especially men who might visit taverns after dark despite curfews. But enough records mention neighbors complaining about midnight prowlers that we know it happened. A knock at the door at 2 a.m. wasn't just disruptive. It could mean trouble. Oh, and if someone died in the night, the whole household was up. Death meant candles lit, prayers murmured, and sometimes the body left lying on the same bed as everyone else until morning. Sweet dreams. So while you fluff your pillow and grumble about a dog barking 3 blocks away, spare a thought for your Tudor counterpart surrounded by snorers, rats, farts, coughs, and sudden chaos. Still think your neighbors are loud. It's late. The fire has dwindled to a faint red glow. You curl tighter under your rough wool blanket, not from the cold this time, but because something just moved in your sheets. Yes, bedbugs, lice, and fleas, your constant, itchy, uninvited sleep companions. And in Tudor times, they weren't just common, they were expected. Let's start with lice. Head lice, body lice, even pubic lice, the Tudors were positively teeming with them. You probably caught yours from your cousin, who got hers from the neighbor's bonnet, which had been borrowed from the neighbor's maid. Lice were part of the natural rhythm of life. Comb them out in the morning. Curse them at night. Repeat. People did try to fight back. There were special combs made from bone or wood with fine teeth meant to drag out the little parasites. Some used herbal remedies, lavender, pennyroyal, rosemary. Others wore linen caps to sleep, hoping to contain the itch. A few noble households kept monkeys or chickens near the bed, not for fun, but because these animals would eat the lice and fleas off your bedding. Charming. Then there were bedbugs, those stealthy vampires of the straw mattress. You'd lie still, trying to doze off, and then feel the tiniest pinch on your ankle, your elbow, your scalp. Too late. They'd already fed. And tomorrow you'd wake up with red blotches and furious scratching, knowing full well they were waiting for you again tonight. Fleas weren't much better. They nested in the floor rushes on the dog in the corner in your father's cloak, or in the layers of your own clothing. Which, let's be honest, you probably haven't changed in 3 days. The flea was practically a family member. It came to dinner, joined you in bed, and left you little souvenirs in the form of itchy welts. And the worst part, people knew, and they laughed it off. One Tudor joke involved a man claiming he kept warm at night by tucking in with his 30 dancing bedfellows, meaning fleas. Another mentioned bedbugs so bold, they bit the bishop before his prayers. But this wasn't just about pests. It was also about bedding hygiene or the sheer lack of it. Changing sheets was rare. Washing them was rarer. Why water was hard to heat soap was expensive. and people genuinely believed that too much bathing or laundering could make you sick. Instead, they relied on airing the bed. Every few days, you'd peel back the covers and prop open the shutters to let in fresh air. That was supposed to chase out the smell, moisture, and vermin. Spoiler, it didn't. To make matters worse, mattresses were rarely actual mattresses. They were sacks filled with straw feathers or old rags. Over time, these fillings broke down, compacted, and became little mobile ecosystems for parasites. You might fluff them, beat them, or even turn them over every so often. But unless you could afford to replace the whole thing, and few could, you were sleeping on a living, crawling thing. Some noble homes had elaborate bed hangings, often embroidered with scenes from scripture or mythology. But those heavy curtains, perfect hiding places for lice and fleas. Close them tight, and you created a warm, cozy pest resort. Open them, and the little monsters scattered like a medieval horror movie. Historians still argue whether Tudor people accepted this infestation as normal or simply had no real way to solve it. Some say people became desensitized. Others believe lice were more than pests. They were seen as indicators of sin or social status. Either way, there's no denying they were everywhere. So tonight, as you lie on your memory foam mattress beneath clean lavender-scented sheets, not a flea or louse in sight, remember this: your comfort is a modern miracle. The Tudor version of a bedtime routine. Comb out your lice, scratch your flea bites. Pray the bedbugs don't find your neck, and tuck in for another night of itchy, restless sleep. Sweet dreams. And maybe double-check your pillow. You jolt awake not from a bad dream, but from the unmistakable thump of footsteps above. Or weight beneath. It's hard to tell when half the family sleeps in the same room, and the rest are tucked in just on the other side of that thin wall. Privacy in Tudor times was not just rare, it was nearly non-existent. The idea of a bedroom as a private, personal space, laughable. For the vast majority of people, sleeping was a group activity, whether you liked it or not. Let's paint the scene. You live in a small, timber-framed house with maybe 2 rooms total. The main hall is where the cooking, eating, arguing, and storytelling all happen. And when night falls, it becomes the bedroom, everyone's bedroom. You've got parents in one bed, children tucked in beside or across, and maybe an aunt or servant sleeping upright in a chair by the hearth. Sometimes multiple generations share a single straw mattress. You sleep shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, noses turned away from each other to avoid breathing in last night's onions. And no, there's no such thing as pajamas. You might sleep in your shift or whatever you wore that day, unless it was especially filthy, in which case you go nude and hope nobody rolls over the wrong way. The term bedfellow was very real. Even in wealthier homes, people shared beds constantly. Travelers, servants, relatives. There are dozens of documented cases of 2, even 3 people sleeping together who weren't married or even related. It wasn't necessarily weird. It was practical. Beds were expensive. Rooms were limited. Bodies shared heat. Problem solved. But that also meant there were no secrets at bedtime. That weird snoring noise you make, everyone hears it. The whispered prayers you say before dozing off, public recital. The midnight toot announced to the whole household with acoustics only a wooden floor can provide. And it wasn't just people. You often shared your sleeping space with animals. Chickens nested in corners. Dogs curled under the covers. A cow might live in the next room, or even in the same one, because warmth went both ways. The more breathing things in a room, the cozier, and the sweatier, and the noisier. Even in Tudor castles, where you'd expect a bit more space and decorum, communal sleeping was common. Servants often lay on pallets at the foot of their lord's bed. Ladies-in-waiting shared rooms and sometimes beds with noble women. Privacy was a luxury reserved for the king, the queen, and even then only sometimes. One rather revealing detail, many Tudor homes didn't even have internal doors between sleeping areas. Just curtains, or wooden partitions with open gaps at the top. The result: you could hear everything. Arguments, snores, prayers, worse. Historians still argue whether this communal setup strengthened family bonds or just made everyone more tolerant of each other's quirks out of sheer exhaustion. Some suggest it created tighter-knit communities. Others believe it forced conformity through constant exposure. There's even evidence that this lack of privacy affected people's mental space. Diaries from the period reflect an intense awareness of others at all times. What they heard, what they might have seen, what they assumed happened after the candles went out. But eventually, sleep took over. No matter the crowd, no matter the noise, you found your rhythm. Maybe someone sang a hymn to lull the little ones. Maybe grandfather told a story that blended fact with folktale. Maybe it was just the low hum of breathing bodies all rising and falling in sync. Tonight, as you stretch out, in your own room door, shut curtains drawn, not a sibling or stray goose in sight. Think of the Tudors pressed together under a sagging roof, snoring and scratching in a great big symphony of tired survival. Alone or not everyone sleeps, but in Tudor times you did it as a team, like it or not. The night deepens. Outside, the wind moans low against the thatch. Inside, you're groggy, restless, and very aware that you have no idea what time it is. There's no clock on the wall, no glowing phone screen, just your own internal compass and the distant echoing chime of the night watchman's bell. Because in Tudor times, keeping time while sleeping wasn't just difficult, it was borderline mystical. Let's start with the obvious: no alarm clocks. If you needed to be up at a certain hour, say before dawn, to start baking or tending animals, you either relied on instinct, the rooster who wasn't always accurate, or a very specific kind of human, the knocker-upper. Yes, that was a real job. Though more common in later centuries, its roots trace back to Tudor-era towns. A knocker-upper was paid to wake you at your requested hour by tapping on your shutters with a long stick or shooting peas at your windows. And if that doesn't sound disruptive enough, consider that your neighbors probably heard it too every morning. In rural areas, people measured time by natural cues: the light through cracks in the shutters, the shift in temperature, or the clanging of the village church bell. Monasteries had their own internal clocks, water clocks, candle clocks, even hourglasses to mark the canonical hours for prayer. But most folks, they simply woke up when they were done sleeping, or when they weren't. Because here's the twist: many Tudor people didn't sleep through the night in one stretch. They followed what historians call segmented sleep. You'd drift off after dusk sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up around midnight. Not just for a bathroom break, this was a full-blown intermission. You might pray, smoke a pipe, visit a neighbor, or even make a quick trip to the privy. Then after an hour or two, you'd go back to bed for your second sleep. Weird, maybe. But for Tudors, it was totally normal. There are dozens of references in letters and literature to this first and second sleep. Some even scheduled their nightly routines around it. One 16th century physician recommended using that midnight window for reflection because the mind was clearer, being lately relieved from vapors. Others warned against too much activity in the gap, fearing it could agitate the humors and cause melancholy. So, don't get too excited. And how did people know it was time for their second sleep? That's where the night watch came in. In towns and cities, designated watchmen patrolled the streets to guard against fires and thieves. They'd call out the hour 2 of the clock, and all's well, sometimes with a bell or horn, and residents would listen groggily from their beds, gauging how long until morning. That sound was both comforting and unnerving. Comforting because someone was out there awake, keeping the peace. Unnerving because if you heard a sudden alarm or too many footsteps, it might mean trouble, fire, a break-in, or worse. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was driven by biology or just a reaction to long, dark winter nights. Some believe people naturally reverted to it without artificial light. Others think it was cultural, passed down, because it fit the rhythms of labor and prayer. Either way, it shaped the entire structure of nighttime. So imagine this: you stir in the darkness. The fire's glow long since gone cold. You hear the faint chime, 3 bells. Someone shuffles past your door, maybe heading to the Jakes. A dog grunts in its sleep. You turn over not to start your day, but to begin your second sleep. Because that's just how it works here. Time, like the night, is measured by feel, not by ticking hands. And when dawn finally brushes your wall with pale gray light, there's no snooze button. Just the squawk of a rooster, the slap of cold water on your face, and the soft creak of another Tudor day beginning. The sky has turned the color of old milk. Not quite dawn, but not quite night either. You shift under your scratchy wool blanket, the straw mattress sighing beneath you. Your joints ache. Your mouth tastes like damp wood. But the day is coming, ready or not. And first you have to survive waking up in Tudor England. You don't spring out of bed. No one does. You groan, you stretch, you probably curse under your breath. Because the room is freezing, your nose is half numb, and your hands are stiff with cold. The fire went out hours ago, and the windows are frosted. You can actually see your breath curl in the air, and yet you rise. Because Tudor mornings wait for no one. Waking up meant dealing with a body that had spent the night hunched, stiffened, and possibly sharing fleas with 3 other people. Your clothes are beside the bed, or more likely you slept in them, because changing was for special occasions, not daily hygiene. There's no toothpaste, no toothbrush. If you're lucky, you chew on a twig or rinse with stale ale. The concept of morning routine is loose. You might splash icy water on your face if there's any left in the basin. And deodorant. That's just hopeful thinking. Next up, relieving yourself. The chamber pot is right there beside the bed, or under it, or on the other side of the curtain. Either way, it's cold, heavy, and already in need of emptying. Someone has to do it. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's a servant's. Maybe it gets dumped straight out the window onto the street below. Either way, good morning. Once you're up, you might head straight to the hearth to rekindle the fire using yesterday's coals if they lasted. A warm fire meant life. No fire meant a long, miserable start to the day, fingers aching as you dress and begin the chores. Speaking of which, there's no lounging. Tudors were morning people by necessity, not by preference. Bakers were already kneading dough. Shepherds were out in the mist. Housemaids were scrubbing flagstones with cold water, and children were collecting firewood. You didn't wake up and then decide what to do. You woke up already behind. Breakfast was often light. Maybe some ale bread and cold leftovers. Hot food was rare unless you were wealthy or preparing for a feast day. And even then, you'd likely eat standing up or sitting on a stool swatting flies and trying not to spill on your only tunic. And yet, there was something oddly comforting about these mornings. Everyone in the household waking and shuffling in the same cold air. The shared sounds of feet padding on floorboards. The same miserable morning complaints echoing across centuries. Historians still debate how much of Tudor life was driven by necessity versus routine. Did they wake early because they had to, or because they'd learned to find peace in the predictability of each harsh, earthy morning? So here you are, awake, dressed in stiff linen, breath fogging in the cold air, ready to dump the chamber pot, restart the fire, and begin another Tudor day. It's exhausting, it's filthy, it's relentless, and somehow, it's beautiful. You're alive. You survived the lice, the fleas, the chamber pot, the snoring, the ghost stories, the itchy straw mattress, the toothless bedmate, the sleep paralysis demons, the cursed windowless room, and the midnight watchman calling out doom in the dark. Not bad. Wind down 300 words. But now, let's pull back. The candle flickers one last time. The chamber pot is empty, the hearth has gone quiet, and the sounds of Tudor life fade like a dream. No more itchy blankets, no more smoky air, just stillness. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles ease. You're no longer lying on straw, but on soft sheets. The air is clean, filtered, modern. There's no one beside you snoring, no rat scratching in the wall, no restless ghost whispering old secrets into your ear. Your room is warm, or cool, exactly how you like it. You can reach for a glass of water, flick off a lamp, tap your phone, and know what time it is without counting bells or listening for the cock's crow. You're safe here. No open flames, no lice. No need to fear your pillow catching fire or the roof collapsing in a windstorm. History can be funny like that. We imagine it with curiosity and awe, but we forget how rough, how real it must have felt. How sleep wasn't always peaceful. How rest had to be earned night after night. But here in this moment, you've earned yours. Close your eyes. Let go of the Tudor nights with all their smells and creaks and discomforts. Let the darkness wrap around you gently, without fear. And as you drift off, remember you made it. You survived Tudor bedtime. Sleep well, end of script. Sweet dreams.